I am joining in late today. For those of you watching, those of you listening later on, it is around 9:39 p.m., which obviously is much later than I anticipate going live most days. And I had I had a significant personal emergency that took me away from my computer for most of the day. And I'm just kind of getting back on, and today would have been the first day that I didn't go live since I started. And so I was actually in the shower just thinking, I did a late workout, like my whole day just got totally kind of flipped on its head. First off, I'm so grateful for the kindness of others. I'm just, I told the person that I was supposed to have this live with today that there was a personal emergency that came up, and they were just so gracious and said, no problem at all. I hope everything's okay. And I'm just reminded here in this moment of how much we all need grace. And I hope I'm much more quick to give it to others, especially when their behavior is weird or we can't actually reason with it. I'm thinking about just the people that we encounter at Starbucks, or the people on the road, or the people at the airport, those really brief encounters that can really make all the difference in impacting our day. If they're not smiling, we might not. And we live so reactive to the energy that people put forward towards us. And man, it's just a good reminder today of how much grace we need, because we have no idea what someone else is going through. And what I want to do today and talk about during this live is this very thing of who do we show up as, who is engaging in these little moments in our lives, because these little moments, these little minute decisions, these little exchanges with people just add to the painting. Each one is a little stroke that adds to the painting that constitutes our very lives. And if we're sitting and waiting for those big moments where we get to don the armor and look good and show up according to our ideal, but we're not living accordingly in the small moments, we're literally missing out on all of those opportunities, not just to love people, but all of those little moments are the very things that form who we are. And so it's of the utmost importance that we hold not just ourselves to such a high standard, but that we're able to take the time and ability of presence to be so here and now that I can catch myself if I start living out of alignment. I want to read something, and I've never done this before, which is reading something rather long, but I just felt compelled to do so. So I'm going to go with it. Theodore Roosevelt when I heard his story, he was, I believe, 30 years old when he lost the love of his life. And he actually went and lived in the Midwest and lived as a cowboy rancher for many years just to really grieve that loss. And during that time, it actually really prepared him for a presidency, because he got to know the common man. And it was wild how that depth of heartbreak, his willingness to literally go into the wilderness, retreat into the wilderness, really prepared him for probably what was the greatest endeavor of his entire life, which was serving as president. And he has this incredible speech. And it's called The Man in the Arena. But as I was thinking about it tonight, I came back on and was just reading through what preceded that section, The Man in the Arena. And I'm going to read it because I feel like I should. So I'm going to do it. As the company grows, its people who have won success in so many lines turn back to try to recover the possessions of the mind and the spirit which perforce their fathers threw aside in order better to wage the first rough battles for the continent their children inherit. The leaders of thought and of action grope their way forward to a new life, realizing, sometimes dimly, sometimes clear-sightedly, that the life of material gain, whether for a nation or an individual, is of value only as a foundation, only as there is added to it the uplift that comes from devotion to loftier ideals. I just want to take a moment there because that blows me away. There's something about the value and the kind of the element of existing on the commitment to the nation, to the individual, yet also with this devotion to a higher ideal. And he talks about it later. I'm just scrolling down. I have this pulled up on my end. I'm reading through, for those of you who just joined, a quote from Theodore Roosevelt. It's actually his speech, The Man in the Arena. And there's just this really, really beautiful, here we go. There's this really beautiful point that he's making of how to live in a juxtaposition. So often we're talking about living this grand, beautiful, lofty, ideal life and living with such high morals and living and pursuing the dream, and or we forget about the ideal and we just are like, okay, well, let me just be a good person. And Theodore Roosevelt is talking about the intermarrying of these two very seemingly opposing thoughts. And so I just love his take on this. It is well if a large proportion of the leaders in any republic, in any democracy, are, as a matter of course, drawn from the classes represented in this audience today, but only provided that those classes possesses the gifts of sympathy with plain people and of devotion to great ideals. You and those like you have received special advantages, and all of you have had the opportunity for mental training. Many of you have had leisure. Most of you have had a chance for enjoyment of life far greater than comes from the majority of your fellows. To you and your kind, much has been given, and from you much should be expected. Yet there are certain failings against which it is especially incumbent of both of trained and cultivated intellect, and men of inherited wealth and position should especially guard themselves. Because of these failings, they are especially liable, and if yielded to, your chances of useful service are at an end. Let the man of learning, the man of lettered leisure, beware of that queer and cheap temptation to pose to himself and to others as a cynic, as the man who has outgrown emotions and beliefs, the man to whom good and evil are as one. The poorest way to face life is to face it with a sneer. Geez, there are many men who feel a kind of twisted pride in cynicism. There are many who confine themselves to cynicism of the way others do what they themselves do not dare even attempt. There is no more unhealthy being, no man less worthy of respect than he who either really holds or feigns to hold an attitude of sneering disbelief toward all that is great and lofty, whether in achievement or in that noble effort which, even if it fails, comes second to achievement. A cynical habit of thought and speech, a readiness to criticize work which the critic himself never even tries to perform, an intellectual aloofness which will not accept contact with life's realities. Wow. All of these are marks, not as the possessor would feign to think of superiority, but of weakness. They mark the men unfit to bear their part painfully in the stern strife of living, who seek in the affectation of contempt for the achievement of others, to hide from others and from themselves their own weakness. The role is easy. There is none easier, save only the role of the man who sneers alike at both criticism and performance. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who actually is in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but he who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotion, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Shame on the man of cultivated taste who permits refinement to develop into fastidiousness that unfits him for doing the rough work of a workaday world. Among the free peoples who govern themselves, there is but a small field of usefulness open to a man of cloistered life who shrink from contact with fellows. Still less room for those of us who deride or slight what is done by those who actually bear the brunt of the day. Nor yet for those who also deride, or for those who always profess that they would like to take action, if only the conditions of life were not exactly what they actually are. Man, this quote by Theodore Roosevelt, I knew I wanted to read parts of it, but I read some parts that I'd never read before. Y'all, how many of us are sitting on the sidelines of our lives and not actually living? And I say this really, truly to myself. You know, so much of this show, I'm having wonderful conversations with other people and also processing the things that I'm looking in the mirror at and really holding myself in challenge too. And even yesterday, I had this amazing conversation with Chad Gill on the Craft and Calling podcast. And we were talking about the ethos of a leader that allows for them to effectively bear the load, both in terms of action, but also example. Example in and of itself is an incredible load to bear. And I'm just looking back at these words by Theodore Roosevelt. You know, the person in the arena will surely fail, and he will err, and his shortcomings will be on, like, the concept of the arena is that people are watching and you're on public display. And that in and of itself for me is terrifying, because now everyone sees. And it is so much, if I have to fail, let me at least do so privately. And this concept of being in the arena with people watching, I had this question posed to myself on my 32nd birthday on Monday. And I reflected to a friend. I said, you know, the thing I'm most terrified of is that by the end of my 32nd year, I'm going to look back and see wasted potential. And then they said, well, what is your potential? And I hadn't even defined it yet. I was already afraid of not fulfilling on it. And so by way of me not defining terms and not actually outlining this is what is possible, I'm bound to fail. I don't even know what it is in order to then go do it. So knowing, the heart of knowing, really comes down to an awareness and understanding that fundamentally changes who we are. Because if we really knew it, change is inevitable. And so if I really truly know my potential, I then have so much more opportunity to capitalize on it and potentially even go and grasp it and take a hold of it. But if I've never actually put terms and words around the potential in and of itself, it's this elusive dream. And I then am living in an illusion. Who am I kidding? If I'm saying I'm afraid that I won't make and hit the mark of my potential, yet I've never even drawn it. When everything ended with my first husband, I have only ever had one. When everything ended with my former husband, that's so funny. I've never said that. When everything ended with my former husband, I was talking with my therapist at the time, and he just gave me such a brilliant and very meaningful example of, if we're not clear about our target, we're going to end up doing a 360. We're effectively going to overshoot, miss our target, and end up just coming back to right where we started. And what that looked like and what that implication lended to in regards to my relationship was that he and I both said we don't want relationships like our parents for many reasons. But because we didn't set a clear target of, okay, well, this is what we do want it to look like, we ended up mirroring our parents, he marrying his dad and me marrying my mom. And for better or for worse, right? I have such beautiful, wonderful examples of wifehood, motherhood in my mom. And I knew that there were parts of that she exhibited that I wanted to change. I'm different. And same for my former husband. But we didn't set the target. We didn't set what our potential is. We didn't name it. We didn't outline it. We didn't have other examples that we could follow. So then if we do go into the arena and actually give this whole marriage thing a shot, there's no way that we will ever be able to have a chance if we're not identifying what do we actually want. Because in so stating it, it then allows for, I think of it kind of the whole, we talk about intellectual intelligences. We talk about the intellectual intelligence, emotional intelligence, physical intelligence, and the spiritual intelligence. And each one operates in very different ways. So when I think about a new target, a new input, I think of it as kind of filtering all the way through, starting with my mind, all the way going down into my soul, where my spirit is, and then it comes back up as an output. And during the process and the intermediary period between input and output is the information processing system. And that whole time, that new target, that new belief, that new desire, that new potential gets crafted and molded and informed by our intelligences, by the examples of those around us. And we actually can effectively put together a game plan and a roadmap for what do I want this output to look like. But apart from this input coming in with the clarity and intention and insight of these different intelligences by our own intention. Intention is almost like the guardrail of the information processing system. It's like the house. Otherwise, this input comes in and it doesn't even go in through the infiltration processing system. And it's just kind of gestating in how do I want to use the visual? So the information processing system, the input starts at the top and it comes in kind of through a funnel and then it's funneled out through the output. But otherwise, if this input doesn't go through that filtration process, the appropriate processing system to shape and inform and bend and define, and it's like the shaping of a diamond. We have to apply the pressure to these ideals that we acclaim to mold them with intention to then have the outward manifestation be in alignment with what we say that we want before the input even starts its whole process of working within us. Yesterday, during my conversation with Chad, he talked about a number of qualities that constituted leadership. He talked about perseverance. He talked about responsibility. He talked about grit. He talked about gratitude. I loved this one because a lot of what we were talking about was having to do with leaders effectively developing their own values, knowing what it is that they believe, that then informs the behaviors. Because if our behaviors don't align with our beliefs, we have to come back to clearly analyze and identify, is this even a belief that I hold? Because if it is a belief that I hold, now I have to go change my behavior. But if my behavior is in alignment with something that I don't actually realize I believe, then I need to intellectually and honestly analyze my belief systems, because obviously that behavior is coming from somewhere. And so over the last couple of days, I've been writing these 21 vertical alignments. This was my birthday gift to you. And it's 21 days of basically prompts that I have moved through myself, but that also I'm just letting other people to move through as well. So just signing up with their email, and then they'll get 21 days of vertical alignments. And these prompts come in the form of an email, and there's kind of 5 steps for these 21 days of vertical alignments. And each morning they'll receive an align acronym, and A stands for awaken, and just really getting our bodies to be turned on effectively. When we think about our physical self and the physical intelligence activating, we have to go in and turn that on and activate that system. And then after awaken, we listen, and that's really for the emotions. So that's our emotional intelligence. We're tuning into what is in our system that needs to come out. What do we need to give voice to what's there before something new, right? So part of this information processing system we can't clog the inputs, because otherwise the outputs are going to be almost like, I just kind of think of it as like this broken engine, like spurting out outputs that aren't congruent, that aren't consistent, that aren't dependable, reliable. We want our bodies to be reliable for ourselves and for those that we love. But if we're not taking time to allow for the space of the information processing system to filter everything that's there, then we actually are going to end up with a broken processing system in and of itself. So listening to what is within is so incredibly important to then give it something new. So we awaken our physical bodies. This is awakening our physical, intellectual intelligences, and then we listen to our emotional intelligence, and then we illuminate our spiritual intelligence. So awaken, listen, illuminate, and then it's time to give something new. It's a new input, and that's G, that's grow. And this prompt is so incredibly important, because during this time, this is the time to go back and do the work. This is the time in the arena. Because y'all, what we don't want is for someone else to force us into the arena without our intention, without our desire, where all of a sudden our partner is like, yo, we got to sit down. I don't know why I said yo. That's so funny. Our partner is like, man, we've got a problem here. Come and join me in the arena. We're going to fight this out. And if we haven't done the work to address whatever that is in the first place, we're caught off guard. We're probably going to be reactive rather than proactive. And so the more that we take the time to go through and understand what is in us, why do we behave the ways that we behave, and then allowing for ourselves to be cultivated under a controlled environment, which is the early morning vertical alignment time for me, which is therapy, which is accountability, which is working with our business mentor. Each one of these curated spaces is a curated arena, like we go to the gym to work out our physical body. We need to curate the time and space to go and actually effectively work out, put in the reps for each one of our intelligences to come online, tell us what's going on. Very intentionally, I will write down things that I need to move through and process and work through for tomorrow's vertical alignment. But for these 21 days, it's a kind of a, let's get into the habit. Here's 21 prompts, and then you're effectively positioned to do it yourself. But we need to be going into the arena of our own choosing, so that when we have to go in there with our partner, when we have to go in there with our business, let's say employee, we've already cultivated the skills of how to do the work on our own, so that we can lead well in those areas, in those times of crisis. Y'all, I have seen businesses fall apart, marriages, my own, fall apart, relationships, even just between parent and child, because of a lack of ability to contend in the arena. And when we're talking about, I started out saying at the very beginning, I really want us to discuss these minute, small moments in our lives that we take for granted as no one's even watching. I remember it was about 2 years ago. I was walking through Walmart. I was probably in Miami. I think I was in Miami for the Bitcoin conference. And I had a pair of sandals that I needed to get. So I picked up a pair, and I was walking a couple rows down, and then I found a new pair that I wanted. And I put the pair that I was currently holding on the rack. And y'all, Walmart is like, there's nothing's organized. And so I just kind of put my shoes up in the wrong place. And then I grabbed the new pair of shoes and started walking away. And I had this moment of realization that this moment in time is shaping who I will be tomorrow, next year, the year after that, what kind of a mother I'll be, how I'll encourage the example that I'll set for my children, and encouraging and leading their behavior and engaging with the store. And it just hit me in that moment, like, wow, this semblance of radical responsibility is here right now with no one watching, with a single pair of sandals at Walmart. And so I went and I took it back and put it back in its place. And even today, there was a moment when I did not want to do something that I knew was the right thing to do. And this is why I bring up Chad from yesterday's conversation. He said, I think about quitting all the time. And I don't, but I'm like, man, I am such a quitter. And he said this, and he's like, I was talking to my wife, and I just told her this kind of plight I'm in because I think about quitting all the time. I tell her, man, I'm such a quitter, and I hate that about me. And she looked at him, and she was like, Chad, you're not a quitter because you're not quitting. Just because you're thinking it doesn't mean that you are that thing. And that just, man, even today, it was so helpful because in that moment, when I knew that my feelings were opposing the very thing that I knew that I needed to do that was right and good for me to pursue, even though my feelings were not in alignment with the action, I still did the action because I knew that my emotions would eventually catch up. And I remembered what he said. Just because we're feeling a certain way does not mean that the action does not follow, and that at some point, inevitably, the emotions will come, and maybe they won't, but we're doing the right thing. And Jordan Peterson talks about this when he likens, a gentleman is asking him, I want to meet my dream wife. And Jordan Peterson says, great, go clean your room. Become that person that will attract that spouse that you say you want. So if we're espousing these beautiful, lofty ideals, but we're not living in a way that's actually positioning us to elevate of our own accord, if we're just sitting on our laurels and waiting, if we're sitting outside of the arena, are we actually preparing ourselves, putting in the rep, positioning our own intelligences to be able to activate, to handle the weight of responsibility that might come with these dreams and ideals that we espouse? It is the little moments, the micro changes that are necessary that fundamentally position us to then be able to be in a place of receivership for something so much bigger than where we are today. I did a coaching session with Dr. Jeff Spencer, absolutely brilliant human. He was the performance coach for Lance Armstrong, and he talks about receivership, and it's effectively positioning all of our intelligences to be at a place for when the time of elevation comes, we are ready. We're ready for game day. And I was working on some copy for, it wasn't even ad copy or anything for a website. I was responding for a news article that's coming out in a couple weeks here in Baltimore. And so I was talking about the craft and calling community. And as I was writing, I just realized how important it is. This was almost like taking the community a layer deeper, how important it is that we're not only willing to fail, but that we're willing to celebrate the things that are so good, the triumphs, so that when the errors and the shortcomings come, they're very natural, but also so are the celebrations and the wins. Y'all, we need the self-administered dopamine hits to keep us going so that when we make the right call, when we do the right thing, even though our emotions aren't there, we can elicit this dopamine hit, this praise, by our own making to elicit the emotions to follow. We are 100% in complete control of our mind, body, soul, spirit. We just have to act like it, and we have to know how to do it. So obviously it's not that easy. And at the same time, it is. There was a couple weeks ago, I had some people over to my home. Actually, this was a couple months ago because I only just got back from being out of town. I had a couple folks in my home, and I just got so out of alignment so fast. And I knew it. I could sense it in my body. I was starting to get annoyed, and I was like, oh crap. Because I know me, and I know when I'm starting to drift out of alignment. And so I went into the bathroom, and I literally looked in the mirror and smiled because I was like, I know there have been studies that prove if people are upset, you can look in the mirror and change your brain waves and brain patterns to align with what you're physically seeing. So I looked in the mirror and smiled, and I told myself some aspects of the truth. The truth is so gray. Yes, I was starting to feel annoyed, and I was also so happy that they were here. And so I chose which element of truth I wanted to fixate on and smiled in the mirror. And y'all, that really helped. It sounds so strange, but it really, really made an impact. So we have so much power, and it is so critical that we take the time to practice through the curation of our own arena, like Theodore Roosevelt talks about, like the quote I read at the beginning, that we curate our own arena, lest we sit on the sidelines criticizing everybody else, lest we show up in the arena not by our own accord, not by our own intention, and we don't know how to engage and contend with the people that we love. And by way of the lack of knowing, we fundamentally ruin what is most important to us because we've not put in the reps. And then third, are we actually taking responsibility to cultivate the intelligences so that each one of them can truly serve as their seat in the board of directors, so that we can activate them, turn them on, listen to them, but then we ourselves are the ones pulling the levers. Yes, today I had the opportunity to act void of emotion. My emotional intelligence was coming online and was like, I am not pleased with this situation. And yet, honestly, my spiritual intelligence came online and helped me remember that part of my ideal is, yes, creating boundaries for me, yes, walking in alignment with him, yes, taking care of me. And there's also something about my ideal that is informed by the ultimate example of love. And sometimes love is, I talked about this, I think it was last week, the 7 different forms of love. And philautia is the self-love. That's a Greek word for self-love. And then there's pragma, which is committed love. And different forms of love are absolutely necessary for us in relationship, but we have to be able to know which one is warranted in that moment. And so often that comes from our intelligence being able to be online, activated, we're tuned in, and we're listening to then be able to know what we need, what the situation requires, and then having the wherewithal to make the decision in the moment to then activate agency and live in accordance with who we say that we want to be. I think that that's it for tonight. Y'all, we have so much power, and I would hate for any of us to end the day thinking otherwise. So with that, I'm going to drop vertical alignments in the chat after this if you're interested in doing 21 days of alignment.